Welcome to the sixth video in a series on building public APIs on the phone. In this video, we're going to go over some feedback that I've received so far on the series. No code this time, but it's a really important part of the discussion. I recently gave a talk at GDG, Silicon Valley's DevFest, and I got a lot of feedback on the talk and on this subject that I wanted to share with you. This video is going to be set up in sort of a Q&A format. Since there's no code, we're just going to go over some of the questions that I received from the audience, and then I'll give a response that may or may not be satisfying. Rooted phones allow apps to sniff on the intents being passed around. How do we protect against this? There were several Android GDEs in the room that helped to answer this question. Basically, when you have a rooted phone, there's no real guarantee of security and anything goes. So nobody can really guarantee that things are going to be secure on a rooted device. That's just not something that we're going to protect against. How do I only allow one app to fire an intent at me? Or how do I only allow one app to consume an intent that I fire? Ryan Harder was in the audience, another Android GDE. He mentioned that you can use intent filters in your manifest to basically lock down your API so that only apps signed with your signature are allowed to interact. How do I know that no other app is going to intercept an intent that I fire off? If I have sensitive information that I'm sending out and I expect only, a certain app that I say is allowed to accept that intent, and then another app starts listening on that intent and the user gets confused and they select that other app and they get that information, how do I protect against that? This is actually a really good question and I don't have a great answer right now. What I'd like to do is cover this in a couple future posts. One is going to be on security and another is going to be a deep dive on intents. Again, I think that this is a really important question to get answered. So we're definitely going to answer it, but I don't have an answer right now. Wouldn't it be less work and more scalable to do this on the web? If we already have a web API that we provide for iOS and we're already doing this for Android, why would we want to build another API that's just specific to Android just to run on the device? Another great question. So I think, something to think about here is that we don't have to do everything on the phone. The question asks basically we're already building all this stuff for the web, for iOS and other users and web users maybe, so why do I want to replicate that functionality on the device? Well, the answer is you might not need all the functionality on the phone, right? So, there's some good reasons to do it, like reducing the bandwidth for your users. If you're in a restricted environment, that might be really important. But if it's not so much an issue, one thing that would really help your users out is at least being able to authenticate on the device. So you could build some sort of authentication API, you could use the accounts that Google provides in Android. So those are going to be things that we're going to go over in, again, future posts. But I think it's definitely a really important thing to think about is that you don't have to do everything on the phone, but I wanted, the sort of what's built in on Android to at least be part of the discussion. I also wanted to mention here that Mike Wolfson had a couple really good things to say about this. He said that, doing this on the phone really allows you to bring down your network usage for the user, which is great for, places like emerging markets, lowering battery usage and, reducing the user's need for mobile data. In the case where lots of developers start actually producing these public APIs on the device, how would developers actually discover them? The question around how to find these APIs once people start building them, I think it's a really good question, and I don't think that there's a really great answer right now. So I think, one of the things that I'd like to do maybe is, or maybe somebody else can do it, maybe Open Intents can kind of get back off the ground and do this, or maybe, maybe people use Tasker as kind of the central repository. But basically, there needs to be some sort of central repository with highly structured data that can tell developers what's available, and the people who are publishing these APIs can sort of say okay, here's what I am, here's who I am, here's what I do, here's how to call me, and here's how to test this. What happens when multiple apps provide the same intent API but don't behave the same? I just mentioned the potential for this sort of central repository, and I think that unit testing is probably going to be a big part of that. One of the things that probably would ideally happen is developers who submit this stuff, they're basically going to say, okay, here's my bit, here's the thing, here's my APK, okay, and here are some unit tests that prove that this works. And, once those unit tests start getting built for a particular intent set, then it's going to be less important about the specific app, and actually it's going to be this behavior around this intent. And we might need like kind of versioning on that or something like that. But basically, you should be able to run tests against, I'm firing an intent here, I'm expecting this result. And it would be really great if we could get to that point. How do we monetize? Right, so we got a question on monetization. I think it's worth discussing and sort of going over. It's definitely a good question. I don't think it has to be difficult, but we have to really think through like how it's going to maximally benefit the users and the API providers and the API consumers. Just charging like on a per call basis might not actually make a whole lot of sense in this case because you're not using any resources on your end to serve this, like you're just on the user's device. So, like I said, I think we'll definitely go over this in a future post. Ryan Harder brought up another really good point. To me, he said, you can think of this like what's provided on the phone is very similar to the web paradigm, and there's sort of like kind of mirroring behaviors. Like intents are sort of like HTTP requests. You can do these kind of requests where you just kind of like fire it off and you may get a response. So that's one, and then like you can have content providers that you can think of like sort of similar to a REST interface. And then you have accounts on the phone, which you could sort of think of like, an auth mechanism like OAuth. Not exactly one-to-one, but there's sort of these kind of ideas that, may help you understand better what's provided by Android when you're building this stuff. In future posts and videos, I'll be circling back to what's been brought up here. Stay tuned, and thanks for watching.